Alright, so today I'm going to be giving my thoughts and review of X2, the fourth dimension coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. It's also a wing coaster, even though it isn't classified as such. The seats do flip around, but they don't flip freely. It's controlled, so every ride and seat will flip the exact same way. This was the final coaster ever made by Arrow, arguably the most significant roller coaster manufacturer of all time. It was their final coaster, and in my opinion, it was also their finest as well. I totally fell in love with this ride on my first ever visit to the park in December of 2018. This can be a polarizing coaster, with some people calling it their absolute overall favorite, while others hate it. The reason behind the differing opinions probably has a lot to do with the fact that you need to ride this the correct way and in the correct seat, otherwise the ride might not be very enjoyable. The popular opinion that I totally agree with is that you should ride it in the right side, also called the stair side, and in an inside seat. Other people will say that the back is better, although for some reason I actually ended up preferring the front part of the train. I usually went for row 2 because row 1 would have more people in line for it. Another piece of advice I would give is to lean your head forward toward the end section of the ride. Somewhere around there, your head gets thrown back, and if you're not leaning your head forward, it might get banged into the seat back. It didn't happen to me on my first ride. I must have just accidentally been riding it the right way. I must have accidentally had my head forward. But it did happen to me on my second and third rides. So after that, I started leaning my head forward in that section, and it didn't happen again. I think it's somewhere around the final Raven turn, so I would usually start leaning my head forward sometime after the big sweeping turnaround. And to go back and explain further about the right side of the train, how to get to the right side, when you're on the ground and the line splits, go to the right. Just remember, when you're on the ground, for the right side, go to the right. That takes you under the station, then up the stairs. And when you board the train, it seems like you're on the left side, but you're not, because everyone is facing backwards. I felt that this side was smoother and didn't fling you as much. And no doubt that the inside seat was smoother than the outside seat, so if you're riding with someone, you'll have to fight over who gets the inside seat. I was solo, so I got the inside seat on all but one of my rides. On my second ride, I wanted to check it out, and it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't nearly as good as the inside seat. Another thing to note is that this is an extremely intense ride, so it will be too intense for some people. I will say that this is definitely the most intense ride I have ever ridden, and I have been on Intimidator 305. Previously, I would have said that Wonder Woman Golden Lasso coaster at Fiesta, Texas was the most intense coaster I've ever ridden, but not anymore. Like with Wonder Woman, I wasn't sure what I thought of X2 after my first few rides. I thought I could really like it, but the extreme intensity made me not sure. Unfortunately, with Wonder Woman, I couldn't get a ton of rides to figure it out because the ride was always breaking down when I was there, and it always had a very long line. I managed 2 more rides on it, and with those, I ended up really liking it. With X2, however, I never saw it break down, and the park was practically empty on the days that I was there. I went on a Tuesday and Wednesday when school was in session, December 11th and 12th. Every ride had little to no wait all day long. My first 2 rides on X2 came early on in my first day. Then I went on to hit up all the other coasters that were actually open in the park. I came back to X2 around sunset time, which was about 4:40 p.m. That's when I figured out how to ride it correctly, on my 4th ride. From that point on, I totally loved every single second of every ride I got, and I loved it more and more with each ride. Since there were so few people there, they were allowing us to just go right back into the station without having to walk all the way around and go back up the queue, which, by the way, is a very, very long walk. That allowed me to get 7 rides in the last hour and 15 minutes to total 9 for the day, which totally amazed me. If you come to this park on a day when school is out, there's no way that you get 9 rides in a day. That is, unless X2 was the only thing you did the entire day, and even then you might not get 9 rides. The park does get that crowded. But it was so empty, I managed 9 rides in under 2 hours total. And around 5:30, we were in full-on night ride mode, so my last 3 to 4 rides were in complete darkness, and the night ride on this is totally amazing. And as good as it is during the day, it's even that much better at night. On my second day, I wanted to get plenty of re-rides, so I did a clockwise loop and ended with X2. And once again, they were allowing us to just go right back into the station without having to go all the way around. I got 5 rides in a little over an hour, the last of which actually had the fire effects turned on. I had heard about those fire effects and that they aren't usually on, but on this, my 14th ride, it had the fire turned on. And from there, I went on and did some pre-sunset rides on full throttle, then made the long walk to Tatsu for a night ride. Tatsu's night ride was quite good, but after getting off, I knew that it didn't compare to X2's night ride, so I hurried on back to X2, getting there at 5:45, 15 minutes before the park was closing. I managed to get 2 amazing night rides before the park closed, and both of those had the fire effects turned on, which was even more awesome at night, and with a little chill in the air because you can feel the heat from the fire. So with 16 rides in 2 days, only one of those was in an outside seat. 13 of the 16 were on the right side, also referred to as the stair side. Getting that many rides on such an amazing coaster really helped launch this up my rankings. After the first 3 rides or so, I wasn't thinking of this as a top 10, maybe barely in my top 25. But once I learned how to ride this correctly, it became a solid top 10, ahead of even Fury 325. Fury is another one of those rides that I had to learn how to ride it correctly. Otherwise, it was an uncomfortable and painful ride because of the B&M rattle. But riding it correctly sent it up my list. But not as high as most people will have it, just because I would still feel that rattle. It just wasn't painful as long as I leaned forward. So, how can I put X2 higher when it's kind of the same thing in that you've got to ride it the right way in order to not get a bad ride? The difference with X2 is that once I rode it correctly, there was no discomfort or rattle of any sort in the slightest. It was just pure and complete joy. It was perfection. I believe that this is one of the greatest roller coasters ever made, and much to my surprise, I like this far more than Twisted Colossus, which is still an amazing ride. X2 was my second most anticipated ride on the trip, but it ended up being my favorite by far. I didn't just put it barely ahead of Fury. I put it way ahead of Fury, even ahead of rides like Intimidator 305 and Twisted Timbers. It's currently definitely a top 4 coaster for me. I'm not sure exactly where I'd put it, maybe even as high as number 2. But there's no doubt that if I had visited this park on a weekend and I had only managed about 4 rides or so in total, that wouldn't have been enough to learn how to ride it correctly and get an amazing overall experience. So if that were the case, I wouldn't be giving this ride such high praise. So most people who will come here on busy days and only get 2, 3, 4 rides on X2, I can see them not thinking very much of this. This is one of those that you need the first several rides to figure it out and get used to the extreme intensity. Once you do, your following rides will be incredible. At least that was my experience. So I'm very glad that I was here on school days so that I could properly experience X2, and that experience was outstanding. So yeah, I can't recommend this enough. I'm a huge fan. If I were to score it, it absolutely gets a perfect score from me. But what do you all think of X2? Did you get plenty of rides in? Did you know how to ride it correctly going in, or did you figure it out along the way? And did your opinion on it improve as you got more and more rides? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.